Hello and welcome to Fix and Drive. Today, I'm going to show you how to change the serpentine belt on an Alfa Romeo Giulia 2.0. Let's get started. Here are some of the tools that you will need for this project. I recommend using some gloves. There's a lot of zip ties around the hoses and it kind of nicked my fingers up pretty good. So I'd say some good fitting gloves are really good for this project. You'll also need a 10mm socket with an extension, a ratchet. You'll also make sure that you have a 3/8 ratchet, an extension piece. You will need a 5mm Allen key. You need a 7mm socket and an 8mm socket. Needs a set of pliers and a hose clamp kit for certain models. If your model comes with this spring clamp, I recommend getting the hose clamp kit. You'll need a couple flathead screwdrivers for the hose clamp kit, some tin snips, and I'm using a pole, but if you have a 3/8 breaker bar, you can use that instead. And another tool, not necessary, but I recommend, is a telescopic magnet tool, just in case you drop any of the bolts down into the engine bay. The serpentine belt I'm going to use is a TRQ serpentine belt for the Alfa Romeo Giulia. Got this on Amazon. I'll post a link in the description below. So in order to get to the serpentine belt, there's a few parts we're going to have to remove. So you can see it's under the air intake hose. So we're going to need to remove that hose. And I'm just going to remove the hose and not the whole intake box. We'll also have to remove the engine cover. And then there's a cover in front of the serpentine belt we'll need to remove. So with a flathead screwdriver, pop the little covers off of the engine cover. And that's going to be fun to find after I dropped it down the engine bay. With a 10mm socket, you'll loosen the two bolts under the little covers. We'll take the bolts out. Take out the other bolt. And then we'll remove the cover from the two pegs towards the back of the engine. So you lift up a little bit and just kind of twist it off. And then they'll pop loose. You can see the two holes where these two little pegs snap into the engine cover. Okay, so to remove the intake hose, we're going to need to remove this hose and follow it to the sensor we'll need to disconnect. And there's a bracket with a 5mm Allen key we need to remove. And this 7mm bolt for the hose clamp. And then here's that spring clamp that we'll loosen with a flathead screwdriver. I'm going to take my flathead and I'm going to slide it into this space underneath the spring clamp. And get it to pop loose. And if you look underneath the intake hose, you'll see these two hoses that are connected with quick disconnect connectors. So there's little buttons at the top, and we'll squeeze those buttons and then just kind of gently work the hoses loose. So there's the first hose, then I'll pinch in these yellow buttons on the second one, and then just kind of work them loose. Okay, and to remove this hose, there's a plastic piece here that will pinch and then just lift up, and it'll separate the hose from the intake plenum. And we're going to follow the wire to this connector here, and then we're going to disconnect that bolt that holds the bracket on. So the flathead, gently pry this tab open. They're kind of brittle, so be careful with them. Then next we're going to take our 5mm Allen key and remove this bolt. Once we have the bolt removed, just kind of gently pry and disconnect that connector. There's a wiring harness that clips to this bracket, and it pokes through on the other side of the bracket. So taking my flathead, I'm just going to kind of press it out so that it releases the connector from this wiring harness. Then last, I'm going to loosen this hose clamp. With the 7mm socket, we'll loosen the clamp. And then once we have that loose, we're able to remove the air intake hose or plenum. We just slide it off from the air box and can set it aside. As you can see, space is pretty tight in here. So I'm going to take a zip tie, and then these two hoses that were underneath the air intake hose, I'm going to kind of zip tie them to hold them just out of the way to free up some more space for the serpentine belt. Okay, so now we need to remove the cover in front of the serpentine belt. There's 2 bolts on the passenger side, and then on the bottom right part of the cover, there's 2 bolts on the driver's side. So first I'm going to loosen the nuts that hold this on. So there's the 2 on the passenger side. And the 2 on the driver's side. Now that the nuts are removed, we can pull the cover out. As you can see, the 2 holes on the bottom and the 2 holes on the side. There are 6 pulleys. You have your tension pulley, your crank pulley, your water pump, your AC, the idler pulley, and then your alternator all the way over on the passenger side. So we're going to loosen the tension on the tensioner pulley. Using your 3/8 ratchet, there's a little square that the ratchet will fit into. And then you can slide a pipe on here. If you have a breaker bar, you can use that. And then pull the breaker bar towards the driver's side to loosen the belt. Once we have the tension loose, I'll pull the belt loose from the idler pulley. And then you can release the tension. So now we're going to pull the belt off the engine. Just kind of work your way around. Get it unhooked from the crank pulley. So the tensioner pulley faces, there's a gap between the engine and the pulley. So you want to turn the belt vertically and then fit it down between that space and pull it down. Once you get the belt down through the space, you can pull the belt out. After removing the belt, I'm going to inspect it. The service manual says to change it about every 30,000 miles. Full disclosure, this is at 82,000 miles that I changed it. It still looks in pretty good shape. So now I'm going to add the new belt. Here's the part number. First thing I'm going to do is twist the belt vertically with the smooth part facing me. And then I'm going to lower it below the tensioner pulley and then bring it up behind the pulley between the engine and the pulley. Just kind of gently work its way up into place. And then once you have it up, you can lay the smooth part of the belt onto the pulley. Okay, so now that we have it around the tensioner pulley section, I'm going to take the lower half and let the smooth part run along the bottom of the tensioner pulley. Then I'm going to bring it around to the crankshaft pulley. Next, I'm going to take the top half and then hook it around the alternator. And since the water pump has a larger flange, I'm going to hook the belt around the water pump first. Make sure that you have enough slack in the belt. And then once it's hooked to the water pump, then I can slide it onto the AC. I'm not going to connect it to the idler pulley just yet. We need to release some of the tension on the belt first. Okay, so adding the 3/8 ratchet, hook it back up to the tensioner pulley. And then I'm going to use my pipe. As I said earlier, you can use a breaker bar if you have a 3/8. We're going to push the belt down as we pull the tension towards the driver's side. And then we're going to take the smooth part of the belt and put it underneath the tensioner pulley. Make sure that you have the belt centered with the pulley. Then once you have it lined up, you can release the tension so that it's nice and tight. Then make sure to remove the bar and the socket wrench. Now we just want to check the belt and make sure that all the grooves are lined up with the pulleys. Here's a diagram of the order that I put the belt around the pulleys. Now that we have the new belt installed, it's time to put the belt cover back on. So we'll feed it through and then slide it into the 2 bolts that hold it in place. Make sure we have it lined up. And then I'll go ahead and hand tighten the nut onto those bolts. The 2 on the passenger side. And then I'm going to add the 2 nuts on the driver's side that's underneath the cover. Then I'm going to take my socket wrench with a 10mm socket and tighten all the nuts down. Before I install the air intake hose, I'm going to snip the zip tie loose that I had earlier. Okay, so now I'm going to start by slipping the hose on to the air box first. And just kind of have to line it up and then gently work its way back on until it slides on. Then I'm going to slide the other end of the hose into the turbo. Then with my 7mm socket, I'm tighten down the hose clamp on the airbox side. Make sure it's good and snug. And then I'm going to add the 2 hoses underneath. And then you'll hear them click into place when you get them tightened. You'll feel them kind of snap in. I'll take the hose on top. I'll slide it back on. You'll feel a little click, kind of snap when it's in place. Then I'll reconnect the sensor connector. Slide it on and then push that tab close, secure it. And then I'm going to put this wire harness, I'm going to feed it the clip back through the bracket. So the hole that it goes through. And then taking the 5mm Allen bolt, I'm going to tighten it back down to the engine. Okay, for this spring clamp hose, There's a special tool that you can hook this back on, but I don't have it, so I'm actually going to take this off and just pry it loose with a flathead screwdriver. There's a little tab, you just kind of pry it out. And then we'll pull it loose around the hose, and this is what the spring clamp looks like. So I kind of bent mine up, so I wasn't able to hook it back on either. But that's okay. There's a different way I'm going to go about tightening it down. I picked up this hose clamp kit on Amazon that gives you a long strand of banding and a bunch of connectors. I'll have it in the description below. So these are the connectors. It uses a 8mm socket, and this is the banding for the clamp. Comes with a zip tie, and I'm just going to slide the zip tie loose to just get some of the banding free that I'm going to use for this project. So now I got some of it free. I'm going to wrap it around the intake hose. And then I'm going to line up just a little bit past where it meets. And then I'm going to mark it by bending that part of the band. Now with a pair of 10 snips, I'm going to snip where I bent the banding. With this worm gear connector, you have the 8mm bolt, and you'll see there's an end that's open and another one that has a little hook on it. We're going to feed the band through the open end first, and then with a pair of pliers, we're going to bend it towards the opening with the hook. I recommend pulling through the banding a little bit farther out. It'll make it easier to slide it up through the opening with the hook. You kind of just twist it through and then feed the band into it. Once you have the band fed through, I bend the banding back, and then taking a pair of pliers, we're going to make it hook backwards by pinching it down. You don't want it all the way down, you just want enough that that hook at the opening will catch. And this is what it looks like. So now we're just going to wrap it around the intake hose, and then we'll start to feed it in, and then with a 8mm socket, we're just going to start feeding it till it catches. And once it does, I'm going to slide it into place and then tighten it down until it's good and tight. And the last thing we'll need to install is the engine cover. So here are the two pegs on the back of the engine that we'll set the cover down on. So we'll take the two holes on the engine cover and we'll line it up with those two pegs. So you just try to get it lined up. And once you do, I just tap it into place. Just hit down on each side. Then we'll take the two 10mm bolts and we'll tighten down the front part of the engine cover. The first one down, now add the little cover piece back. And then I'll add the second one and tighten it down. Now we have everything tightened down. I'm going to start the engine, make sure the belt is running properly and that it's not wobbling or coming loose. Okay, and that's how you change the serpentine belt on the Alfa Romeo Giulia or Stelvio 2.0 Turbo. This isn't too bad. The hardest part is removing the belt cover, mostly because of the bolts on the driver's side. But other than that, you should be able to do this in about an hour. I think it's totally worth doing it yourself versus taking it to a dealership. So if you found this video helpful, please like and subscribe. And I'd love to see your comments down below. Thank you, stay safe, and God bless.